So, imagine your company's servers get locked down by a massive cyber attack. The hackers are demanding like a $500,000 ransom, and after agonizing over it for days, you finally just pay up.
Right, which is always a terrible feeling.
Oh, completely. But then, instead of getting the decryption key you paid for, you discover that the hackers actually broke their own software, and they permanently deleted your data by accident.
Which means you just paid a fortune for absolutely nothing.
Exactly. That is the reality of modern digital deception, where even the criminals are lying about what their tools can actually do. Welcome to Calm Coding, your weekly cybersecurity podcast that covers the latest news and stories.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are unpacking a stack of recent sources centered around a single unifying theme, which is the architecture of trust and deception in digital systems. Our mission is to explore how things are, not always what they seem.
Yeah, and it's a huge issue right now.
It really is. So we'll be looking at malware that fundamentally lies about its true nature, alleged manipulative user interfaces designed to trap you, hidden vulnerabilities in our global telecommunications, and a very modern ethical tug-of-war over artificial intelligence in the military.
It's just a really fascinating cross-section of the security landscape right now.
Yeah.
People usually think of cybersecurity as this highly technical battle of, firewalls and encryption keys and raw code.
Right, the typical Hollywood hacker stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But when you look closely at these recent reports, so much of the risk actually comes down to behavioral psychology, basic economics, and honestly, the blind assumptions we make about the tools we use every day.
So true. And when those underlying assumptions are exploited, the fallout is just entirely unpredictable. Let's actually start with the most direct form of digital deception out there right now, a cyber threat that fundamentally lies to the computer about what it actually does.
Ah, yes. VECT 2.0.
That's the one. So this is a relatively new piece of malware. On the dark web, it's being heavily marketed as ransomware as a service, or RAIA, and the developers have even teamed up with a newer threat actor known as Team PCP.
And they've already made a pretty big name for themselves, attacking groups like the European Commission, right?
Yeah, exactly. They are not small players. But researchers looking at the code uncovered a massive critical flaw. VECT 2.0 is functionally broken. Like, it's not an encryptor at all. It actually acts as a permanent data wiper.
The mechanics of why this matters are completely rooted in the underground economy. I mean, the entire business model of ransomware as a service relies on this really twisted form of customer trust.
Customer trust, yeah. Which sounds crazy to say about criminals.
It does, but it's true. They lock your files, you pay the ransom, and they give you the key to unlock them. If they fail to provide the key, word gets out, and future victims simply stop paying. The whole syndicate just collapses.
Right, nobody's going to pay a ransom if they know they aren't getting their files back anyway.
Exactly. So in the case of VEC 2.0, researchers at Checkpoint discovered that the malware severely mishandles a fundamental cryptographic component called a nonce.
Okay, let's pause and translate that real quick. Because a nonce isn't a term most people use every day. That's basically just a random number used just once in cryptographic communication, right?
Well, on.
It's the thing that makes sure the encryption is actually secure and unique.
Yeah, that is the textbook definition. A nonce ensures that even if you encrypt the exact same piece of data twice, the resulting scrambled text looks completely different each time. You absolutely need that specific, unique nonce to decrypt the file later.
Okay, so where did the VECT developers mess this up?
Well, this is where they made a catastrophic error. When the malware encounters a larger file, it splits it into smaller chunks to encrypt them one by one. But instead of allocating new memory space for each new nonce as it moves from chunk to chunk,
Let me guess. It reuses the same memory.
it reuses the exact same memory space. It literally overwrites its own previous nonces as it works down the file.
Wait, so it's deleting its own keys as it locks the doors. That is wild. It's like if a kidnapper demanded a ransom, but they've already accidentally dropped the hostage out of a third-story window.
Oh, wow.
Right,
Yeah.
like paying the ransom gets you absolutely nothing. The data is just gone.
That is a dark analogy, but it perfectly captures the reality of the situation. Because those nonces are continually overwritten in the memory, only the very last chunk of the file can theoretically be recovered. Everything before it is permanently, irreversibly scrambled.
That is just incredible incompetence.
And it gets worse. The threshold for what VECT 2.0 considers a quote-unquote large file that needs to be split into these chunks is almost unbelievably low. Any file over 128 kilobytes gets subjected to this destructive process.
128 kilobytes. Wait, really? That is laughably small. I mean, a standard low-resolution photo from a smartphone or a simple Word document with a single logo in it is usually larger than that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which means virtual machine disks, corporate databases, system backups, routine accounting spreadsheets, virtually nothing of value falls below that 128 kilobyte boundary.
So it just breaks everything.
Yeah, in practice, this malware destroys everything it touches. Even if the threat actors genuinely wanted to play by their own twisted rules and decrypt your files after you paid, they physically cannot. The mathematical keys no longer exist.
I have to wonder what this level of sheer incompetence means for the ransomware economy overall. Because, as you mentioned, these syndicates operate a lot like legitimate tech franchises.
You really do. It's a whole ecosystem.
Right. You have developers selling the software and then these affiliates doing the actual dirty work of hacking. So what happens to the trust between the developers and the affiliates when the flagship product is this fundamentally broken?
It creates total chaos for them. The affiliates are the ones taking on the massive operational risk of infiltrating these networks. If they deploy VECT 2.0, demand a multi-million-dollar ransom, and the victim's IT team discovers the data is permanently corrupted anyway.
The gig is up.
Exactly. Word spreads incredibly fast in the cybersecurity community. Future victims will see the VECP file extension on their locked computers and immediately refuse to pay, knowing recovery is mathematically impossible.
Because what's the point?
Right. The affiliates lose their massive payday, and the developers lose their reputation on the dark web forums. It really shows that the underground digital economy is just as susceptible to shoddy coding and terrible quality assurance as any legitimate software company.
So VECT 2.0 is a clear case of code deceiving the computer. But deception in the digital world isn't always that binary. Sometimes the deception is aimed squarely at human psychology.
Which brings us to the privacy sector.
Yeah, specifically some alleged deceptive business practices. Recently, a $100 million class action lawsuit was filed in Virginia against Nord Security, which is the company behind NordVPN, NordPass, and NordLocker.
Right, and the complaint was filed on April 10th, 2026 by a plaintiff named Craig Schnappinger. He's seeking to represent users across Virginia and North Carolina.
And what's the core of the lawsuit?
It revolves around the use of what regulators call dark patterns and negative option billing. The plaintiffs are arguing that Nord Security uses manipulative website designs to trap consumers into pricey, auto-renewing subscriptions while making the cancellation process intentionally and exceedingly difficult.
Let's dig into the specifics of those allegations because there's a very particular complaint about the timeline of how they charge users. According to the lawsuit, Nord charges users 14 days before their subscription actually expires.
Right, a full 2 weeks early.
Yeah. And the allegation is that the warning email sent before that charge hits fails to clearly explain that users have to cancel the recurring subscription 14 days prior to the expiration date just to avoid being billed for the next cycle.
And that practice is the absolute cornerstone of the negative option billing argument. Psychologically, it relies on a customer's inaction or forgetfulness to continue the service rather than requiring them to make an active, conscious choice to renew.
Just hoping they don't notice until it's too late.
Precisely. But to look at this impartially, NordVPN has firmly pushed back on these claims. Their privacy advocate stated publicly that their subscription terms are presented completely clearly right at the point of purchase.
Okay, so they're saying it's all there in the fine print.
Yeah, and they also maintain that they send charge reminders to customers with long-term subscriptions a full 30 days in advance. Furthermore, they pointed out that they proactively updated their terms and conditions in February to ensure they are in ongoing compliance with consumer protection laws.
I'm trying to look at this from the perspective of a standard user, because as someone paying for a security tool to protect my privacy, it feels incredibly ironic if the company itself is accused of using psychological tricks to trap my credit card.
It's definitely a bad look.
But on the flip side, aren't auto renewals just the baseline industry standard now? I mean, almost every single streaming service or software subscription I have auto renews. Where is the actual legal and ethical line between a standard business practice and an illegal dark pattern?
That is the exact friction point the court's going to have to untangle. You're right that the tech industry heavily favors auto-renewal because it guarantees continuous, predictable revenue. But regulators usually draw the legal line at the intersection of transparency and friction.
Friction meaning how hard it is to cancel.
Exactly. Think about the cognitive load on the user. If a service takes one simple click to subscribe, but requires you to navigate 5 hidden menus, chat with an automated retention bot that tries to offer you discounts, and then send a formal email to actually cancel.
Yeah, I've been there. It's the worst.
Right, and regulators increasingly view that added, asymmetrical friction as a dark pattern. The ethical question is all about intent. Is the user interface designed to provide a seamless, uninterrupted experience, or is it deliberately weaponizing human decision fatigue to keep you paying?
It's fascinating because dark patterns rely entirely on users simply not noticing the fine print or just giving up because the process is too annoying. But hackers use a similar concept of hiding in plain sight on a much larger scale, don't they?
They absolutely do.
Relying on massive crowds and sheer volume to mask their activities. Which brings us to the massive telecommunications challenge of the upcoming 2026 World Cup in the US, Mexico, and Canada.
The scale of this event is honestly staggering from an infrastructure perspective. Estimates project roughly 6.5 million football fans will be converging across the 3 host countries over the course of the tournament.
That is a lot of smartphones.
A ridiculous amount. And for cellular networks, that means a massive, unprecedented spike in roaming mobile traffic as international fans bring their phones abroad.
Now, when we talk about network vulnerabilities, I keep hearing about highly sophisticated zero-day exploits. Is that what the telecom companies are worried about here? Some brand new, unknown virus?
Actually, no. The vulnerability here isn't a new piece of malware at all. It is a structural flaw in the foundation of the global telecom network itself.
Oh, really? Like how the networks talk to each other.
Exactly. When you take your phone from the UK to the US, the networks rely on legacy protocols to allow those different carriers to talk to one another and route your calls. We're talking about protocols like SS7, which was originally built in the 1970s.
The 1970s.
Yeah, and its slightly newer successor, Diameter. These systems were built decades ago in an era of absolute, total trust.
Wait, total trust, meaning they just assume whoever is sending the signal is supposed to be there.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
They assume that if a network operator is sending a routing signal, that operator is legitimate and honest. Because the architects of these protocols prioritized global interoperability over security, they never built in native end-to-end encryption for these underlying signaling messages.
That's terrifying. I'm just picturing a stadium security guard checking tickets for a massive concert, but he's using a manual written in the 1970s.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
The system inherently trusts anyone holding a piece of paper that looks vaguely like a ticket, making it practically impossible to spot modern, sophisticated counterfeits when thousands of people are rushing the gates at once.
And the volume is exactly what makes it so dangerous. When you have millions of fans suddenly roaming on these networks, the sheer wall of legitimate data requests provides the perfect camouflage.
So they just blend right in.
Right. Attackers can route fake signaling messages through international roaming hubs. Because the SS7 and Diameter protocols inherently trust the signal, a bad actor can use this traffic cover to secretly track a specific user's physical location.
Wow.
Even worse, they can intercept SMS messages, which is a nightmare if you rely on text messages for two-factor authentication on your banking apps. And they can commit massive automated billing fraud.
Our sources noted that smaller Tier 2 and Tier 3 operators are particularly at risk during this event. For anyone not deeply embedded in telecom infrastructure, what makes them so much more vulnerable than the massive household name telecom giants?
It generally comes down to operational budget and legacy infrastructure. A massive Tier 1 operator has the immense capital required to deploy advanced proprietary signaling firewalls and maintain huge 247 security operations centers.
And the smaller guys just don't have that cash.
They simply lack that massive budget. They might be running older, poorly configured firewalls, or they completely lack the advanced analytics tools needed to detect complex, subtle signaling abuse hiding inside a tidal wave of legitimate roaming traffic.
So kickoff is in June. There is obviously no physical way to rip out and upgrade the hardware of the entire global telecommunications network before the first whistle blows.
No, not a chance.
So what is the actual solution here?
You're right, hardware upgrades are completely off the table. The networks have to rely entirely on short-term, high-impact software defenses. First, operators are rapidly pivoting to cloud-based security shields. Because they exist in the cloud, they bypass the multi-year procurement and physical installation cycles of traditional hardware firewalls.
Okay, that makes sense. Quick to deploy.
Exactly. Second, they are setting up automated, algorithmic alerts that act as digital tripwires. If the system's AI suddenly detects a burst of fake text messages or an unnatural spike in expensive international calls routing through a specific node, it instantly kills the connection without waiting for human approval.
Catching the fraud at the source before the financial damage spirals out of control.
Exactly that. And the final, arguably most crucial piece is cross-border intelligence sharing. Roaming partners have to break down their silos and communicate in real time.
So they can warn each other.
Yes. If an operator in Mexico spots a new fraud syndicate exploiting a specific signaling flaw on day one of the tournament, they have to instantly share those indicators of compromise with operators in the US and Canada. That way they can proactively block those bad actors before they shift targets.
Well, while securing global mobile networks for a massive sporting event is a looming theoretical challenge right now, the reality is that critical infrastructure is targeted every single day.
That is the daily reality of the industry.
Yeah. So let's shift from theory to practice and look at a recent real-world example where the digital defenses actually held the line. Let's talk about Itron.
So Itron might not be a household name for everyone, but they are an American utility technology giant with a massive footprint. They provide the smart meters, the field sensors, and the underlying data platform for managing electricity, gas, and water distribution.
So they are everywhere.
Everywhere. They serve more than 8,000 utilities globally. Their technology touches hundreds of millions of people, and they generate around $2.4 billion in annual revenue. Because they are the digital bridge to physical critical infrastructure, they are a highly prized target for advanced threat actors.
And we know they were targeted because of a mandatory transparency alert. According to an 8K form, which for anyone unfamiliar is a required document public companies must file with the SEC to announce major events that shareholders should know about. Itron suffered a cyberattack on April 13th, 2026.
Right, they had to disclose it.
Yeah. The hackers successfully breached parts of their IT network. But the story didn't end with blackouts or frozen pipelines. Itron quickly activated its cybersecurity response plan, brought in external advisors, and effectively stopped the bleeding.
The mechanics of how they stopped it are what make this a textbook case of solid defense. When we talk about a cybersecurity response plan, we aren't just talking about changing passwords.
Right, it's way more intense than that.
The moment the intrusion was detected, Itron's security teams would have moved to aggressively segment their network. They isolate the compromised servers to prevent the threat actors from moving laterally into the more sensitive operational technology, the systems that actually control the smart meters.
Basically slamming the blast door shut.
Exactly. They revoke compromised credentials, quarantine the malicious code, and force the attackers into a bottleneck. The outcome here is really notable. There was zero material disruption to their operations. No sensitive customer data was exfiltrated. And whatever mitigation costs they did incur are expected to be fully covered by their cyber insurance auspices.
It's crazy because we usually only hear about the catastrophic breaches on this show. The hospitals that get shut down, the municipal governments held hostage. This story sounds almost boring, but in the best way possible.
Boring is the highest compliment you can give to an incident response team.
Right. What's also interesting to me is that no hacking group has stepped forward to claim responsibility on the dark web for this attack. If they breach the IT network, why just slink away? Does the lack of a group taking credit show that public shaming and extortion really only happen when the hackers actually win the fight?
It perfectly illustrates the mechanics of digital extortion. When a ransomware group successfully steals sensitive data or locks a critical system, their entire leverage comes from public pressure.
They need the PR to get paid.
Yeah. They post the victim's name on their dark web leak sites, threatening to release the data, just to force the victim's executives to the negotiating table. But if the attack is intercepted early, if the intrusion is blocked and the network segmented before any data is actually exfiltrated or encrypted, the hackers have zero leverage.
They have nothing to hold over them.
Right. Claiming responsibility for a totally failed attack only draws the attention of federal law enforcement and international intelligence agencies without any financial upside whatsoever. So they cut their losses and quietly disappear. Itron's layered defense worked exactly the way it was designed to.
So Itron successfully defended its turf using traditional human-led incident response. But when we look at the future of digital defense, the tools and the players are changing at a blinding speed.
AI is changing everything.
It really is, and the U.S. military is actively shifting its artificial intelligence alliances right now. And it is raising some massive ethical questions about who we trust to build these foundational systems. Let's look at the Pentagon's recent pivot toward Google Gemini.
And to understand this shift, we need to look at the facts impartially. as this involves significant ethical and political friction between the Silicon Valley tech sector and the Washington defense establishment.
Right, there are a lot of strong opinions here.
Very strong. The Department of Defense recently confirmed it is significantly extending its use of Google's Gemini AI model to include highly classified projects. According to a Google spokesperson, the military is applying this AI expertise to complex logistics, cybersecurity threat analysis, diplomatic translation, and predictive fleet maintenance.
But this expansion didn't just happen in a vacuum. It comes on the heels of a major public fracture with another prominent AI vendor. The Pentagon recently canceled a massive $200 million contract with Anthropic, the makers of the Claude AI model. Why exactly was Anthropic shown the door?
The split basically came down to irreconcilable usage policies. Anthropic has established incredibly firm hardline boundaries for how its artificial intelligence can be utilized by anyone, including governments.
They drew a line in the sand.
They did. Specifically, they point-blank refused to allow their Claude model to be used by the military for what they define as fully autonomous weapons or mass domestic surveillance.
And the military didn't like being told how they could use the tool.
Exactly.
Because Anthropic would not compromise or grant exceptions on those internal ethical boundaries, the defense secretary designated the company as a supply chain risk, canceled the $200 million contract, and effectively banned their technology from being used by any government contractors working on military projects. Anthropic is actually currently engaged in a legal battle with the Pentagon over that specific risk designation.
So Anthropic says no, and the military pivots. But the transition to Google hasn't been completely smooth sailing either, right?
No, there's been pushback there, too.
Yeah, over 700 Google employees signed an open letter asking their CEO to reject the military's use of Gemini for these classified purposes.
Right.
It's like the military walked into a hardware store shopping for a highly specific tool, and Anthropic said, look, we won't sell you this hammer if there's any chance you're going to use it as a weapon. So the Pentagon just shrugged and walked one aisle over to Google's hardware section instead. That is the reality of a multi-vendor strategy. The Pentagon has stated very clearly that they need diverse technology suppliers to avoid being locked in with a single company's ecosystem or ideology. Cameron Stanley, the Pentagon's AI chief, commented on this overarching strategy by saying, over-reliance on one vendor is never a good thing. You don't cook a Thanksgiving turkey in the microwave. You need to have the right technology for the right use case to achieve the right outcome.
So how does the Department of Defense practically balance this? You have the strict ethical boundaries set by the employees of these tech companies on one hand, and the military's stated need to maintain a diverse base of cutting-edge AI vendors on the other.
It is an incredibly delicate balancing act, and it's honestly far from resolved. On one side, you have tech companies whose developers, researchers, and founders operate under specific moral frameworks regarding how their creations should be utilized in warfare or global intelligence gathering.
Which is totally understandable. They want a say in what they build.
Right. But on the other side, you have a defense apparatus that argues it needs access to the absolute best commercial technology available just to maintain national security and global parity. If the military decides they can only work with companies that place zero restrictions on the technology, they risk alienating the brightest engineering minds in the AI sector who want a say in how their work is used.
But if they just agree to all the limits...
Then the military argues they might find themselves without the right digital tool when a critical, unforeseen national security crisis arises.
Right.
Right now, the Pentagon is actively trying to build an ecosystem of interchangeable AI vendors. That way, they can swap out models depending on the specific operational need, effectively bypassing the ethical bottlenecks of any single company.
Wow. Well, today we've navigated the deeply deceptive layers of our digital world. We started with the absurdity of VECT 2.0, a ransomware that secretly acts as a permanent data wiper, mathematically destroying the very files it claims to hold hostage.
A literal disaster for everyone involved.
Right. Then we looked at the complex allegations against major privacy tools, accused of using psychological design friction to trap your money in endless auto-renewals. We uncovered the ancient, trust-based vulnerabilities hiding inside the mobile networks preparing for the crush of the 2026 World Cup, where absolute trust is actually the biggest security flaw of all.
It really is.
We also saw a quiet textbook victory for critical infrastructure defense with Itron successfully isolating a threat. And finally, we examined the modern ethical battlegrounds of military AI, where tech companies and the Pentagon are currently fighting over the rules of engagement.
It's a lot to take in. And as you interact with your own apps, your cellular networks, and your enterprise tools this week, take a moment to ask yourself what is actually happening beneath the surface. We rely on these systems seamlessly, but it is vital to continually question whether the invisible architecture holding up your digital life is truly worthy of your trust.
I couldn't agree more. And we'll leave you with this final thought to ponder on your own. The digital tools we rely on are becoming exponentially smarter every single day. But as we saw with the ideological split between Anthropic and the Pentagon, technology does not operate in a moral vacuum. When an artificial intelligence becomes a foundational, undeniable pillar of global security and warfare, whose personal ethics and values should it be forced to adopt? Thank you for listening, and remind yourself to tune in next week to Calm Coding.